When I was a kid, my family used to go on road trips through Europe, and we'd end up back then, there were arcades. You'd play arcade games, and I was playing this arcade game, and it was in New York, post-apocalyptic. You were beating up all kinds of bad guys. I decided back then that I want to make that game. I want to make a game like that. And I don't know how, but I got my hand on like a C++ book and read through it. And that was kind of the moment where I decided that I want to make video games. And then like 20-some year later, I moved my family all across the country to finally make that, New York post-apocalyptic game that 12-year-old me wanted to make.
So it's definitely okay to go through this door, right? The alarm's not going to go off. So we're just going over here.
In the heart of Malmö lies a major player in the world of blockbuster video games, Massive Entertainment. In the 2010s, they spent more than 3 years carefully crafting an entire world for a new game called Tom Clancy's The Division, which would go on to become one of the biggest cultural exports Sweden has ever produced. The Division and its sequel, released in 2016 and 2019, are online role-playing games set in New York City and Washington, D.C., in the fallout of a pandemic.
My name's Fredrik Thailander. I'm the lead gameplay designer here. I worked on both of the Division games. The Division is a Tom Clancy game, so it's going to be a version of the real world. One of the main inspirations was an exercise the US did in the early 2000s called Dark Winter.
One day there will be a pandemic. It could begin during the crush of Black Friday sales.
It was about what would happen if they needed to deal with a bioterrorist attack through a virus. When it comes to being a Clancy game, it comes with responsibility, right? And I think that because it's a game where we can't direct the camera and everything at all time, the way we approached it is to build the world super robust. Every street corner has a story and an idea of what had happened there. Every enemy or friendly that you come across has an idea of what the story that led to them, and that is all anchored in this kind of thriller, spy fiction that signifies Clancy. It's our world, but in a what-if scenario, and you take that and you build it up so that anywhere the player goes, the game is telling them stories that echo that.
I would say I'm the happiest when we get to tell these micro stories. I get to tell stories and the player gets to experience the stories that we want to tell in the world. My name is Kila Meyer and I am a level artist at Massive Entertainment. As a level artist, you work on the world. Everything in the environment of the world, that is what we do. Everything in the Division 2 is also hand-placed. So everything you see in the game is touched by an artist like us. Basically, we built the game in steps, so we don't just work on one area in the game. It would start by me replacing all of the level placeholders that a level designer has placed. A placeholder is like a box with, say, all the buildings, they're now boxes. I would have to replace those first. After all the buildings are replaced and we put in sidewalks, we then start working on adding smaller details, putting in our thematics, everything else. We collaborate a lot with other departments every day because other departments, they support us with what we are doing.
Incoming alert on the SHD emergency channel. Flash priority.
The base of operations is under attack. Hostile forces have breached our southern perimeter.
My name is Simon Kudryavtsev. I'm the art director here at Massive. I think really on the Division series is when I learned everything about what it takes to make a AAA game. First of all, there's a big difference between sound in games and sound in movies.
Let's go!
Sound in movies is a linear type of media where you always know what's going to happen on the timeline at any given time. The difference in games is that you don't have this timeline. You have to think about the sound from a very granular level. This is kind of how it looks. One of the systems, which we call bubble space, it's almost like a bubble above the player that checks the current width around the player. And so the idea being that if you are in a wide space compared to a very small space, the sound reacts differently. So if we were to shoot a gun in a tight space, it would be sounding like you're in a tight space, but if we are in a big square, we change the weapon tails to be sounding wider. And you can also see all of the active emitters, which is basically a visual representation of all the sounds that are being triggered currently by the engine. So it's all about trying to create a system that mimics the sound physics of the real world.
Despite its scale, it's still handcrafted, it's still manually built. All the cracks and destruction, the cables lying around, the blood footprints on the floor, the dust, the things left behind, all these little details were manually put into place and handcrafted. My name's Chad Chatterton. I'm an environment artist here at Massive. The environment artist is responsible for building the game world that the game is setting, to recreate the world in as much detail as they can. Inspiration mainly comes from observing the real world. That's one thing I really enjoyed about working on The Division was it was about recreating the world as we see it. The way we begin building environments is to first build the infrastructural layer, the base layer. So if you imagine picking up a city and turning it over in your hands and giving it a shake, all the things that don't fall out onto the floor, buildings, the sidewalks, the street lamps, all these things comprise the civic layer, which is the base layer we begin with. On top of that, we start to build narrative layers, layers that tell stories about what's happened in this location. We do a lot of surface treatment with decals, so these are sort of semi-transparent textures that you can apply on top of surfaces, leaks and stains and things. It could be concrete damage, corner damage. We had damaged versions of just about everything. All the cars existed in clean versions and also in versions of various states of damage. To begin building these damaged states in the world, you first, of course, have a plan of what's the story, like what enemy factions are involved here, what have they done. Your task as an environment artist is to really try and tell that story for the players to read visually throughout the space.
Video game developers are the kind of method actors of visual culture in that they go out and live these places. And you know, that's a vital part of it because video games are so intricate now and so authentic and realistic. Playing Division is kind of basically be like five-a-side football, but in your living room and with advanced military weaponry.
The White House is under attack. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill.
Do you want to take this bit, take these enemies? Yeah. What I like about this, you can obviously see the White House in the distance. You know, it's a building that everyone's going to know, but you look around and all the foliage is overgrown. There's wrecked vehicles everywhere. You can see on the walls as well in the background, people have put leaflets up about missing persons. I love the way that they've kind of established the realism of the environment, but yet added on top of it this kind of this dystopian, apocalyptic vibe.
It's using, as you said, all the places that you know.
But yeah, as we get closer to the White House, I just really love the detail of it. The building is semi-destroyed. It looks very much like a sort of apocalyptic movie.
What the Division 2 did, they really revamped the weapons and modifications, and they worked a lot with the players, so it kind of was this symbiotic relationship between developers and players. Well, you know, when a director puts a film out, they're like, this is my vision, and, you know, nothing can really be changed from that. Whereas with video games, like player experience really informs the development process. Like, they sort of act as unofficial beta testers, making sure that, you know, what the developers put in the games are actually liked and received well.
So this is quite sort of quite a glamorous location, a sort of foyer of a sort of grand building, but it's still, the game still provides you with loads of cover positions, but they feel naturalistic. So obviously there would be a safety railing there, so that makes sense. There's somewhere for you to hide behind. And as you move into the map, you also get these kind of plant areas, desks shoved together. But it all looks naturalistic. It all looks as if it belongs there rather than as barriers that have been put in simply to provide you with cover.
Exactly, because this is kind of like a natural environment.
Game design set pieces like this operate much more like theatre sets than film sets because they have that sense of depth and that sense of stages as well. You know, a theatre set is usually sort of designed in a series of sequential steps to add depth to the scene. And that's exactly what's happening here. So this is almost like a vast theatre set, really. You need to get rid of that guy. Yeah. Take out the guy on the left. Take out the guy on the left.
So what's really cool is, in addition to consulting with players about, you know, the weapons and the mods, they went through a lot of effort to try and make sure this looks and feels as much like Washington DC as possible. So there are lots of little monuments and nods to the real place, which just helps to ground you in it. And I've never been to Washington DC, but if I ever went, I know I'd be able to point out stuff that I've seen in the game.
Massive wanted the game's environment to be as authentic as possible, so they sent a small group of researchers to Washington, D.C. to identify the details that make the city unique.
So this is the book production from the World Texture Facility trip to Washington, D.C. for the Division 2. At the end of the research trips, the World Texture Facility department produced these books so that the information reaches a broader part of the team, because not everyone can go on these trips, of course. Washington gets immediately more interesting to an environment artist when you step off the main street and enter the alleyways. Afterwards, they took us to an unmarked building that housed these weapons and these police vehicles. So we were able to look closely at all the weapons, all the vehicles and elements there. It's interesting that saying you're a game developer, what doors that can open.
When you take something that's a big vision and then try to work through all the years it takes to make it a playable game that you can put into the hands of players, you're going to face a lot of challenges. There's some things that look cool, but then they're not really comfortable to play, or maybe having the interface, the agents bringing up their watch and looking at the interface isn't practical when you need lots of things on a menu, or there's just a lot of things that have to be translated into practical comfort from a vision. I think for the Division, the urban environment is really challenging. Everybody knows exactly how things should look. These are spaces where people have been, and it has to have a certain fidelity, it has to react a certain way. If you're making a very abstract game or colorful game or Mario game, you can change the environment to fit what plays best. But here, you have to marry the two, and that's a big challenge. And that's a lot of the work you have to do as a designer, is just really try to maintain as much of the Division as possible whilst, making it playable.
My name is Benedikt Podlesnik. I'm the art director here at Massive. As an art director, what I am doing is I'm pretty much just trying to start with the visual framework of the game. In terms of comparing art direction in the game to other media, in the movie you look at it from one angle. You have a script, and you design around that. From a game point of view, what you do is you build a world, and then you let players loose in that world. It's very exciting to, instead of just making a nice picture, to make a world that you can move around, you can spend time in, you can go around and take photos yourself. When we start up the project and we look at, okay, how do we represent and create the city? We do a lot of, we create a couple of example scenes where let's recreate this corner here, and we are not recreating it as a one-to-one kind of comparison, because sometimes a street corner is not that interesting. But if we add a little bit of detail without going overboard, we can enhance. Artistically enhance the reality to become a little bit more interesting. That's I think how we push a little bit the photorealism as I see it. Yes, it's realistic, but also the emotion and the feeling play a big part of the visuals as well. There's many ways to find the inspiration. A lot of times it's just me walking around outside or seeing something. A couple of days ago I was just inspired for a different project by scrapings on the floor of a construction site.
My inspiration for making games, I pull from everywhere. I can walk down the street and see something that inspires me that I will then think, that's a good idea for the game. So really inspiration can come from anywhere and at any time that will then somehow feed into the game and therefore to the player and their experience in the game. My name is Matt Karpinski. I'm animation director at Massive Entertainment. Being an animator, I do tend to look at the world a little bit differently, maybe perhaps to others. I've done so many walk cycles, which is very much an animator's thing, that you get to notice the timing and style of people's walks, which is kind of funny to think about, but that extra level actually brings believability or style to the game. Observing people in their daily lives, walking, talking, working, is something that very much transcended into the civilian settlements in the game. All that comes from a reflection on real life. So whenever you just take a moment to sit and take in the real world, that's where you can get inspiration for certain actions and reactions and bring that real life into the game.
In terms of the research we do, one thing that we trying to do is we take many photos, there's many videos, and that's how we start our research. But also we are organizing interviews, we organize meetups with different characters from all different walks of life. We can feel out the city, we can feel out the people in the city. We see places that as a tourist you wouldn't be able to probably to see. So we get a really interesting picture of what is behind the scenes. When you go out on the street and you look at the taxi cabs or you look at the buses, they all have a very specific design in each city that really tells the player that this is this location. If you go to London, you will see the double-decker buses, the red buses. If you go to New York, you will see the yellow cabs. This is our world Bible, our world logic document, which includes everything that the game is and was made at the very start of development. It is the one document that we always come back to when we build the world, and it says right in the document, the very first page for us. It's why we actually create this, and the main thing is we want to have a game where the world really comes first. We want to have like a consistency. Artistic consistency in everything that goes into the game. So there's nothing that stands out, nothing that feels odd, nothing that feels weird. For this project, I think it was one of the most complex parts of development to recreate the visual identity of the city. To define, like, okay, what are the brands that we actually want to recreate? And obviously there's the top Priority is the city brand. It's the Washington DC brand. Here, this is like one of our documents that we create when we start looking at the city and the authenticity for it, the identity. And here we see the real version. When you're in DC, this is the real Washington DC branding. And here you can see like our interpretation of it. We make a list of what is the most important things, but also bring back the research that we went and gathered a lot of photos and identify there what did we see, what make the city special, from big citywide advertising to small signs that point you the way in the city, to license plates, to bins, down to like having small little campaigns run by the city talking about how important recycling is. These kind of small things make a big difference in terms of the identity of the city. The parking hours, and we're very precise using the real parking hours that you actually see in the city, down to the paper phone app. And you might see even a QR code here that if you scan it, you get to a certain result from it. And if you miss one thing, you might miss the entire feel of the place. Tourism. We have our own tourism brands that have their own tour buses with their own advertising throughout the city, campaigns that actually run that you can follow. All of this together, even small details combined together, will create the feeling and identity of the city.
We try to replicate the world in the game as much as it looks like in real life. We have our own coffee shop branding in the game called Kerman's Coffee. We would basically, okay, let's make this a Kerman Coffee. I would set dress it to look like a real coffee place. We would, for example, go and use map services online, and we would look at, okay, what does this area or what does this street look like in real life? We would say, okay, there's a trash can on the corner of the street. We would also place a trash can in the exact same place.
Speaking of the details, there's one thing that took some time to get right, and it's the sound of rain on the objects in our game. For instance, we wanted to not only have the sound of rain when it rains, we also wanted to give it more depth by making sure that the objects around the player, be it a car, be it an umbrella or whatever it might be, would have a specific sound of the rain hitting that object. It's like a simple detail, but it takes quite a lot technically to achieve it. But the end result is that it feels natural. It feels like you're progressing through the soundscape of rain, and it's not just a 2D kind of experience. There's now a rain sound on the car. You can hear the subtle drops on the leaves. So it's all these small details that are building up the overall kind of soundscape. Usually for every type of sound that goes into the game, you have maybe 8 or 9 variations. There's always a bit of randomness for all the types of sounds, because you don't want to hear repetition, because that breaks the immersion. It's kind of a cliche thing to say, but if we've done our job right, then the player shouldn't notice too much, and it should just feel natural.
We can take our transplant out of the pot, like this.
Looking back at the first division, we set the game was set in around like the Black Friday, so it's like winter time, or a couple of weeks after Black Friday, winter time. The darkness, the snow, the dense atmosphere. You can feel the coldness, you can feel the environment and the mood. And that was one thing when we worked on the second game. How do we contrast it to not just become like a version of the first game, but being something that is very different, like visually as well, but still retaining the elements that made the first game so engaging. And we wanted to keep that aspect of the game, but bring that into like a summertime setting. So like the humidity of it, heat, haze, like all these kind of things. So we wanted to really push forward this feeling of heat and denseness and atmosphere. So it was one of the biggest challenges, I think, that we had to face.
It was a day's worth of motion capture for the dog. At least a day's worth, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. The animation production is very much based on motion capture. And motion capture is kind of like a film set, except that the actors have small reflective patches on them, which are picked up from multiple cameras around the room. Those cameras will track one of these dots and translate that movement in space into 3D, which is then mapped onto a 3D skeleton in-game, which then moves the characters around. That's a good one. Sharp turn. So this is some data from a motion capture shoot that we did with a real-life dog. So we had the dog in a small, tight suit covered in these reflective spheres. And then we tracked them just like as we do humans. We tracked the dog's movement around the set and had it do runs, walks, turns, jumps, everything that we need to create a full locomotion set in game. And yeah, it was a fun shoot that I didn't go to. It was the only shoot in the whole of Division 2 that I didn't go to. So this is an example of one of the many animals we have in Division 2. However, not all animals we can motion capture, because we can't put a motion capture suit on a squirrel because it's a little bit small and they're untrained. So for animals like that, we had to handcraft them. And it goes to show the skill of the animator in creating this by hand that fits in with the realism of the Division 2.
We have a lot of graffiti made by our prop department. There were so many, and that was awesome because then we could actually see, okay, what fits in my area the best. But we also have graffiti that was specifically made for this game by actual artists. So these are really awesome. I really liked placing these. We really had to find like an area. Okay, what area do we really want to show off? I also have this one, for example. I felt that this wall was very bare, and I think the art that the artist made for the graffiti is awesome, and it really tied the world together a bit more than when it's just, you know, old looking.
What Massive Entertainment did with its depiction of New York was quite staggering in a lot of ways. It was so intricately detailed. The way that they captured not only the reality of the city as we all know it, the buildings that we all know, the streets that we all know and recognise, everything was in there, but they laid on top of it this kind of apocalyptic, nightmarish, dystopian vision. It had a real kind of atmosphere, I think. Going back to the game after the COVID pandemic, we saw on the television images of lockdown New York and how quiet it was. It's almost spooky that the Division caught that 4 or 5 years before the pandemic. There's nothing weirder than a dead city. And I think, that's what the Division caught so beautifully.
World building has become an increasingly essential component for these games. As technology advances, so too does the capacity for game creators to tell their stories in more and more intricate and immersive worlds.
One thing that I thought was really fun were when fans were posting pictures of the Division world and its real-life counterpart.
I see the players post screenshot comparisons of their character in the game versus a picture of themselves standing in that exact same street in real life. It shows us as level artists that our hard work really paid off because we try our hardest to make the world look as great in the game as it does in real life.
You look at 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and think how much it's changed as an art form, and project that 10, 20, 50 years in the future, it may be something that we barely recognize today.
I think a video game is art. You could compare it to an oil painting. The only difference would be that in our game, it would be an interactive experience for the player as much as it is art.
I think it has a hard time being seen as an art form. It's hard to see something as an art form that is so in the popular consciousness.